After the accession to power in 1933, the Nazis systematically began to eliminate the remaining democratic elements all across the Reich. Stormtrooper marches became part of the daily routine in Munich's streets too. The elected Bavarian government capitulated without resistance on the 9th of March. Now opponents of the new regime were mercilessly persecuted and sent to the nearby concentration camp in Dachau. This footage shows the arrival of the newly elected Reich Chancellor at Munich's Riem airport. From now on, Hitler mainly stayed in the Reich's capital. His visits to Munich became less and less frequent.
The political power of the National Socialists was gradually transferred to Berlin, and then after 1933, Berlin became the center of political power. But Adolf Hitler had explicitly decreed that Munich, which was given the honorary title Capital of the Movement in 1935, should remain the seat of the NSDAP national headquarters.
Sitz der Reichsleitung der NSDAP bleiben solle.
This is the reason why certain institutions from all the party's administrative departments had their offices here, in the area between Königsplatz and Karolinenplatz.
The Nazis had been using the area around Königsplatz for their marches since the early days. On Hitler's decree, the site was to be converted to a forum of the movement. Paul Ludwig Trost, one of the Führer's preferred architects, had the square tiled with granite slabs especially for their marches, in order to amplify the noise produced by the parading formations. It was the first major construction project of the new government, and Hitler frequently inspected its progress. Rare footage from the personal archives of Albert Speer shows him probably in the autumn of 1935. The dictator was interested in every detail. After the Königsplatz, he went on to examine the two so-called blood temples at the front of the square and afterwards the shell of the Furabau. His plan was to have a complex built covering the entire area between Karolinenplatz and Königsplatz to accommodate the party headquarters. The Furabau was erected next to the identically constructed NSDAP administration building on the eastern side of Königsplatz. The imposing building was intended to be used for receptions and state ceremonies and was accordingly pompously furnished. Nazi propaganda claimed that some of Hitler's own ideas had been incorporated in the plans. However, he didn't show up here often. As of 1957, the building was used by the College for Theatre and Music. The Munich Agreement was signed on the 29th of September 1938, here in Hitler's former study. In the previous months, Nazi propaganda had been reporting on alleged ill treatment of the Sudeten German minority in Czechoslovakia. With this treaty, the European powers agreed to the German Reich's annexation of Sudetenland in the hope of preventing a war. A year later, the German Wehrmacht invaded Poland. The underground tunnel system beneath the Furabau has also survived.
This is one of the underground connecting passages. The entire party headquarters was subterraneously connected. This is the tunnel that led to the Brauner's house. Over there is a longer tunnel that went beneath Brienner Straße, ending at the NSDAP administration building. On the walls, you can still see all the graffiti the Americans left behind.
American GIs scrawled their initials on the walls in 1945. Over 60 years later, these inscriptions indicate the stations of their deployment during the war.
These were the storerooms of the Furabau. As the compound mainly served representational purposes, receptions and banquets and so on, they needed large storage facilities for supplies. This was the beer cellar, and over there was the red wine cellar. After the war, the Americans wrote, "Keep out, Germans and co." This was the potato cellar, which was looted by the locals before the Americans arrived. The guards had already left by then. Before the Americans came, people forced open this door. The bullet holes are still visible.
The plan was to build a new party chancellery for the NSDAP leadership, the counterpart to the Reich Chancellor in Berlin, right next to the Furabau. Construction for the monstrous administration building commenced in 1938. Atelier Trost, a Munich-based firm of architects, had done the design work. But construction was suspended at the beginning of the Second World War, so the chancellery was never built. The only parts that had been completed were the enormous underground bunkers. Originally, all air raid protection facilities in the party district were connected, so that all the buildings would remain accessible in case of emergency. These shelters were intended to be used exclusively by Nazi functionaries. Only when the Allied bombing attacks on Munich intensified was the party bunker opened to the civilian population. The building that houses the Institute of the city's Technical University was erected on top of the bunker in 1970. In the course of 2007, the underground tunnel system will have to make room for a new building of the College for Television and Film. In 1937, 4 years after the foundation stone was laid, the House of German Arts, another Nazi edifice in Munich, was ceremoniously inaugurated with a procession. From now on, the Day of German Art was to be celebrated here every year. But the war put a stop to these plans. There were only 3 processions in all. When exhibitions opened in the House of German Arts, they were frequently staged as pompous propaganda spectacles. The museum is one of the few representational buildings of the Nazi regime which were actually built in Munich. These celebrations always attracted many Nazi notables to Munich. Adolf Hitler himself attended the Great Exhibition of German Art. In 1939, he was given a guided tour of the exhibition rooms by Gerdi Trost, the widow of the architect. Art that conformed to his regime was to the Führer's taste. Until 1944, the presentation of what the Nazis considered to be art took place annually.
Das festliche Haus der deutschen Kunst birgt auch im 4. Kriegsjahr die Schöpfungen führender deutscher Maler und Bildhauer. Das ganze Volk nimmt mit offenem Herzen Anteil am Kunstschaffen der Gegenwart. Wir erleben das Antlitz deutscher Männer und Frauen. Die gestraffte Figur eines Arbeiters. Neue Quellen des künstlerischen Schaffens erschließt der Krieg. Es ergreifen uns zutiefst der beherrschte Schmerz im Gesicht des Verwundeten und die vom eben beendeten Kampf noch aufgewühlten Züge des Soldatenhauptes.
Hitler had been directly involved in the planning for this building too. He even laid down the exact site where it was to be built. At the inauguration, he described the stone-clad museum as the first beautiful building of the new Reich. Art is a sublime mission and an obligation to fanaticism, added the dictator. After the war, a section of the undamaged building was used as an officers' mess by the Americans until 1955. The rest of the building remained a museum. At the same place as the Nazis had staged their notorious show of so-called degenerate art in 1937, visitors could now view works of art that had been banned during the 1,000-year Reich. The Haus der Kunst is still used for exhibitions of all kinds today.
Der Führer besichtigte mit dem italienischen Minister Lantini die neu eröffnete Architektur- und Kunsthandwerksausstellung in München. Die Ausstellung bringt einen Rechenschaftsbericht über die neuen großen Bauten in Deutschland.
In Munich too, Hitler let his architectural megalomania run wild. The buildings he commissioned for the capital of the movement exceeded all reasonable dimensions. The original model for the restructuring of Munich into the Führer city has survived the war undamaged. It is exhibited in Munich's Municipal Museum. The planning did not just entail individual buildings. The whole city was to be redesigned. The new face of Munich would symbolically present the city's role as the birthplace of National Socialism.
Geplant war nun,
They were planning to erect a grand forum at the end of each Autobahn dedicated to the so-called pillars of the party, the SA, the SS, and the Hitler Youth. So the pillars of the party would literally support the capital of the movement. Starting from these forums, they were going to build wide access roads to the places of historical significance for the party. For example, one would be able to drive directly from a forum to the Bürgerbräukeller.
Hitler entrusted the implementation of his vision to architect Hermann Giesler. Jochen Wilk was one of the people working in the architect's office at that time.
Giesler was quite close to the Führer, who would frequently summon him for progress reports. Hitler approved of more or less everything that Giesler presented to him, but occasionally there were issues about which Hitler had made up his mind and wouldn't budge, and Giesler had to accept that without question.
The most hideous plans were those for the new central railway station. The original model is currently being restored by experts in Munich's Municipal Museum. It hasn't been on display for many years because of its poor state of preservation. Christian Hale's team is now putting the remaining parts of the model together. The old terminus station was to be replaced by a new gigantic through station further west, featuring a huge dome construction.
The dome was supposed to cover 20 double tracks, which means the dimensions would have been huge. The first plans provided for a diameter of 245 meters, but it soon became clear that this wouldn't be enough, so it was increased to 265. Based on this figure, a complete plan was then drawn up for the whole station, including static calculations and so on.
Whether the huge dome would have been feasible is highly doubtful. Starting from the new station, a new east-west axis, the so-called Prachtstraße, or Glorious Boulevard, would then lead into the city centre.
Essentially, all this would have been just enormous blocks, relatively undifferentiated. All they were planning to do was line up facades. The functionality of these constructions didn't interest anyone at first, or even at this stage of planning.
The plan was to erect an oversized column of the party at the end of this road, on the site of the old terminus station. Just like the new station's dome, this column is another indication of Hitler's megalomaniac fantasies.
The column was not Giesler's creation. The original design was Speer's. Giesler revised the column several times because he found it too tall and too chunky at the base. But basically, none of us working in Giesler's office were keen on that column. It was never a popular project, the column of the party. Its design was wrong from an urban planning aspect. It was much too big, and it would have ended up being even taller than the towers of the Frauenkirche.
The Nazis planned to display the so-called Blutfahne, or blood flag, from Hitler's 1923 putsch in the base of the column. Just as in other cities of the Reich, the first victims of this urban restructuring were the Jewish citizens. On the 9th of June 1938, 5 months before the Night of Broken Glass, the main Munich synagogue was demolished upon Adolf Hitler's personal orders. The Jewish community was charged with the demolition costs of the building. The authorities claimed traffic-related problems to justify the demolition. In reality, the discrimination of Jewish citizens was well advanced by then. The Aryanization of Jewish companies and businesses had already begun in 1933.